So you want to homeschool your kids or just help them with their homework, but the idea of having to work with fractions makes you want to cower in the corner like a whipped dog. Perfect. You're in the right place. Welcome to class. I'm Jennifer. I'm the bleeping teacher, and this is part 1 of No Fear of Fractions.
The bleeping teacher is a Navy veteran, currently teaching GED classes in a prison. This video is not intended for children under 13 or adults who feel the need to clutch their pearls when they hear profanity. If at any time you find yourself clutching your pearls, please note that the emergency exit is located at the top of your screen, where you can click out of the video.
Math, and fractions in particular, universally typically sucks for everyone. But the beautiful thing about math is that it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't give a who you vote for, who you sleep with, what you call yourself. If your kids are public schooled, homeschooled, private schooled, Montessori school, math doesn't give a and neither do I. I'm here to help everyone. So if you really want to understand fractions, you just have to understand that it's some pieces of a whole ass thing. When we talk about the parts of the fraction, we're going to use the correct terminology. None of that top number, bottom number bullshit. Remember, correct terminology is going to drill this into your kids' heads. The numerator, all of that means, it's just the top number that shows how many parts we have. For the denominator, all that's saying is that is how many parts are in our whole. Children start learning about fractions in the first grade. However, it's presented under that geometry standard, and it says
partition circles and rectangles into 2 and 4 equal shares. Describe the shares using the word halves, fourths, and quarters, and use the phrases half of, fourth of, and quarter of. Describe the whole as 2 of or 4 of the share. Understand from these examples that decomposing into more equal shares creates smaller shares.
all that's saying is they're going to divide circles and squares into 2 and 4 parts. Use the word halves, fourths, and quarters. We're going to describe the whole shape using the same numerator and denominator, and they're going to understand that the more we divide a shape, the smaller it is. So let's talk about half. Look at that. We got 2 pieces in this whole. Our denominator is going to be 2. One of them hoes is shady, so our numerator is going to be 1. 1/4 or 1/4. In our whole shape, we've got 4 equal parts. That's going to be our denominator. But only one of them shaded in, so that's going to be our numerator. The term 1/4 gets very confusing for children when they transition into telling time because they associate that 1/4 with the quantity 25. And who am I kidding? It's not just kids, adults get confused by it too. So when you're introducing that 1/4 concept, really focus on the fact that it doesn't just mean 25. It is 1/4 of a whole. When it comes to telling time, that means 15 minutes, not 25. Look at this shape. We have 2 pieces in our whole, and both of them are shaded in. So that's 1 whole or 2 halves, not 2 tooths. In this shape, we have 4 equal parts in our whole. All 4 of them are shaded in, so that's 4/4, 1 whole. I'm going to show you something that universally fucks with people when they're learning fractions. Children and adults alike, it doesn't matter. It's hard-grained in our minds that we think of numbers and quantity, and we think the bigger, the larger, the more it's worth. That's not the case with fractions. If we look here, we've got 1/2, 1/3, and 1/4. However, the fourth is our largest number, but it's the smallest piece. When it comes to fractions, the lower the denominator, the bigger the piece. Because as that denominator goes up, we're sharing more. The more we share, the smaller of a piece we get. Now, when they get to second grade, that's when they're going to start fucking with thirds. And when we start dealing with thirds and dividing and creating shapes, it's not as easy. You're going to spend a lot of time eyeballing that shit. Partitioning circles when the denominator is 2 or 4 is going to be much easier than when the denominator is an odd number like 3. Because when it's an even number, we're just cutting shit in half. However, when it's an odd number like 3, you kind of have to eyeball it. And when it comes to thirds, the best way to do it is like a peace sign, but without that bottom part. They're also going to recognize that equal shares of identical wholes need not have the same shape. If we look at all 3 of these squares, they are divided into 2 equal parts, but the equal parts don't look the same. Doesn't matter. That's still half. Fractions on a number line.
Represent a fraction, a over b, on a number line diagram by marking off a length from 1 over b from 0. Recognize that the resulting interval has size a over b and that its endpoint locates the number a over b on the number line.
Putting fractions on a number line is visually one of the best ways to truly understand fractions, and your kids are going to have to do that anyway. It's part of the curriculum. Seeing where a fraction actually falls between 0 and 1 and even beyond 1 is really going to drive home reasoning skills, because eventually you're going to be able to do fractions and shit in your head, because you're going to be able to envision what a half looks like, what a quarter would look like, an eighth, a 16th. All of those things are going to come naturally over time. What fraction does the dot on the number line represent? The first thing we need to do is figure out what our denominator is. So we need to check out how many equal parts we have from 0 to 1. We've got one equal jump there and another equal jump there. So that means that our denominator is going to be 2. Now we need to go back to the dot to figure out what our numerator is going to be. There's only one equal jump from 0 to that dot, so our numerator is going to be 1. Sometimes that dot isn't going to be there, and it's going to tell them that they need to partition the number line into 2 equal parts and label each part. Now, when it comes to partitioning a number line, shit can get a little confusing, okay? I like to practice the principle of take that shit down a notch, which means whatever our denominator is, we're going to take 1 away from that. So if our denominator is 4, we're going to have 3 cuts in our number line. If our denominator is 2, we're only going to have 1 cut in our number line. So by the principle of take that shit down a notch, because we're going to have 2 equal parts, we only need 1 line. And we're going to put that bitch right in the middle. That's 1 half, 2 halves. What fraction does the dot on the number line represent? First thing we got to do is figure out what that denominator is. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal jumps from 0 to 1. So our denominator is going to be 4. Now we're going to count our equal jumps to the dot. There are 3 of them. So our numerator is going to be 3, which is going to make this fraction 3/4. Partition the number line into 4 equal parts and label each part. So when we are partitioning, we need to keep in mind our principle of take that shit down a notch, which means our 4 equal parts are going to be done with 3 cuts. Now, because 4 is an even number, our first cut needs to go right in the middle of this bitch. 2 cuts to go. We only have 2 cuts left, and everything has to stay equal. That's the fucking magic of fractions. It's got to be equal. So we're going to place one of those on each side of our halfway point. Label that shit 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Now, when we're working with a denominator that is an odd number and we have to partition a number line, we can't just chop that bitch in half, okay? So our principle of take that shit down a notch means that for 3 equal parts, we're going to have 2 cuts. Again, we can't just put 1 in the middle. You're going to have to eyeball that shit. 2 equal cuts, okay? That looks about right. 1, 2, 3. Let's partition this number line into 5 equal parts. So because we're having 5 equal parts, that means that our fraction for a whole is going to be 5/5. Now, 5 is not an even number, so we can't just cut this bitch in half. So our principle of take that shit down a notch lets us know that we're going to be making 4 cuts in this number line. I recommend using dots and arrows before you put your line placement. It's going to kind of help you get a visual of whether or not you're getting shit pretty even. I can already tell you that based on these dots, that is much closer to the 1 than to the 0. So, let me try it again. 3, 4. Now, when I say use your arrows to check about your distance, you want to check to see if your arrows are about the same size. That doesn't look terrible. I'm going to put my lines in. Let's partition this number line into 6 equal parts. I recommend that you go ahead and label your whole, your one whole, as a fraction. So it's going to be 6/6. Because that denominator is even, we can go ahead and cut this bitch right on in half. Boom. So our principle of take that shit down a notch means that we are going to have 5 cuts in this number line because our denominator is 6. So 5 cuts, but we've already done 1. So we have 4 cuts left. 4 is an even number. Everything has to be even when we're doing fractions, guys. That's the whole point of fractions. It's fucking equal parts. 4, I can do 2 cuts here and 2 cuts here. Not even I can do, I must do. So, 2 cuts. Can't put one in the middle. 2 cuts here. If some shit's off, just even it up. I mean, it ain't fucking rocket science. Move your line around if you need to. Looks pretty good to me. Now let's label the parts. Part 2 of No Fear Fractions is going to be equivalent fractions and reducing. Remember, help your kids now so I don't have to help them later.